For months now, ICE has been quietly buying industrial warehouses around the country, reportedly with plans to turn them into a network of immigration detention and processing centers to hold tens of thousands of detainees.
Let's start with the size and scope of this. Can you give us an idea of ICE's efforts to create this system of detention centers throughout the country?
Yeah, so they're going all around the country. We're seeing this happen all the way up in New Jersey, New Hampshire, all the way down to Orlando in Florida, all the way out west. They're trying to build places in Kansas and Oklahoma. This is all over the country. They're focusing on warehouses they can find a little bit outside of large towns. So we're finding these about 45 minutes to an hour outside of large city centers. And they're trying to fix these near logistics hubs where it's easy to move people in and out of the city. So we think that ICE officials have stated that their objective is to make the system of detention and deportation more efficient. He said, we want to be able to move humans around the country as efficiently as Amazon ships packages.
What's the overall cost of this? How much is the Department of Homeland Security and ICE spending on this? So
they're projecting to spend $38 billion.
What's your reporting on the timeline that ICE has for this? How long is it going to take them to be able to convert these warehouses?
So it's really rapid. They want this whole system of up to 24 facilities to be up and running by the end of the year, essentially.
The Trump administration has begun buying warehouses in small towns and cities as part of its $45 billion push to rapidly expand immigration detention spaces. It recently purchased 2 warehouses, one in Maryland and the other in Arizona, for a total of $172 million. A third in Texas could be among the largest jails of any kind in the U.S., with 8,500 beds. That's according to the Washington Post. U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement plans to buy and convert nearly 24 warehouses. Federal immigration agents are now operating with some of the most powerful surveillance tools ever used by a U.S. law enforcement agency, and civil rights groups are sounding the alarm. After a bill passed last summer turned Immigration and Customs Enforcement into the most highly funded law enforcement body in the country, ICE has moved quickly, buying facial recognition systems, biometric trackers, mobile phone location databases, spyware, and even drones. But this massive tech expansion is not just about immigration enforcement. In recent months, ICE leaders, backed by top officials in the Trump administration, have asserted the authority to monitor and investigate anti-ICE protest networks, including those involving U.S. citizens. An annual report from the Department of Homeland Security confirms that ICE has significantly expanded how it uses facial recognition, artificial intelligence, and other advanced tools, while also loosening internal restrictions on their deployment. One mobile app now allows agents to scan faces, fingerprints, and even iris data on the streets, matching people in real time against immigration databases. Democratic lawmakers and civil liberties groups are warning these blurs the line between immigration enforcement and mass surveillance, raising serious questions about privacy, free speech, and government overreach.
There have been more and more stories that we're starting to see about the U.S. government essentially trying to create a network of concentration camps. They're going around buying up warehouses to create these detention centers with the goal of being able to detain an extra 80,000 people. They are all across the country. They are looking at 8 regional centers and then more satellite detention centers around those 8 regional centers. These are buildings that are in no way set up to accommodate people. And we have now seen clips of like what people are being put through in these concentration camps.
People laying on the floor, head to toe. That reminded me of the pictures that I saw in elementary school of how they brought the slaves from Africa.
For months, this person had access to what our cameras are not allowed to see.
Mire cómo nos tienen aquí. Mire qué migración cómo nos tienen.
The inside of the same Baltimore ICE detention center showed in this viral video.
Nos tienen en un depósito aquí en Baltimore.
The former worker showed WUSA 9 documentation proving they were employed there.
It was probably day 1 day 2 that I saw the abuse.
What did you see?
I saw people laying in feces, people throwing up, people laying in urine.
The U.S. District Court Judge Jerry Blackwell said the overwhelming majority of people brought to his court by U.S. Immigration and Customs and Border Protection since the Trump administration's crackdown started have been lawfully present in the country.
Tonight, the Trump administration is facing new pressure over conditions at the Baltimore ICE detention facility. After WUSA 9's exclusive whistleblower investigation, Maryland Congressman Jamie Raskin conducted a surprise inspection. Yeah, and he says what he witnessed was, quote, extremely inhumane.
Yeah, and today 9 members of Maryland's congressional delegation joined forces to demand answers here. Our chief investigative reporter Eric Flack is here now with the latest. And Flack, we know that a human rights group also filed papers in court to force changes at this facility.
So that's a lot of moving parts with this story. The Amicus Center for Immigrant Rights filed a legal brief late this afternoon seeking a preliminary injunction, and that could force immediate changes at the facility. Now, the moves come as members of Maryland's congressional delegation are pushing for their own reforms.
New numbers from the Trump administration show a record number of people are in immigration detention in the U.S. NPR's Jasmine Gards says that's according to data from U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement.
Immigration detention numbers reached a new high in January, over 71,000 people. There were around 40,000 at the beginning of the Trump administration. Of the current detainees, 74% have no criminal conviction, and almost half have never even been charged. The administration has come under increased scrutiny for its immigration operations in Minneapolis following the killings of 2 American citizens by federal agents. In response, Border Czar Tom Homan has said these are highly targeted operations seeking out criminals. Immigrant rights advocates say the operations are casting wide nets and racially profiling people with no records.
Taoiseach, I want to raise today with you the case of Seamus Culleton, the Irish citizen, the Kilkenny man, who has now spent 5 months imprisoned in an ICE detention camp in Texas. Yesterday, the country was silenced, listening in as Seamus phoned Liveline to speak about his ordeal. Last night, I spoke directly with Seamus' sister, Caroline, and I heard more details about the appalling conditions in which he is detained. 72 men packed into a single tent, filth everywhere, lack of sanitation, violent guards, alleged strangling, 3 men dead already, and conditions so brutal that detainees are gambling on who will be the next person to take their own life.
The best way I could describe it is probably like a modern-day concentration camp. It's a bunch of temporary tents. There's probably room for 1,000 detainees in each tent. I believe there's like 5 tents. I've been locked in the same room now for 4.5 months. I've had barely any outside time, no fresh air, no sunshine. I could probably count on both hands the amount of times I've been outside. So just locked in this room all day, every day. We've got 2 TVs on the wall. We get 3 meals a day, very, very small meals, kid-sized meals. So everybody's hungry, everybody's tired. We've got no commissary, we've got no options to get extra food or anything like that. And the conditions here are filthy. The toilets, the showers, completely nasty, very rarely cleaned. I'm in fear for my life down here, honestly, because people have been killed by the staff here, by the security staff, and you just don't know what's going to happen on a day-to-day basis. You don't know if there's going to be riots. You don't know if there's going to be. You don't know what's going to happen. It's a nightmare down here.
Well, a woman visiting her family in Hawaii in November is now sharing her experience of being arrested by ICE agents during a green card interview. Hannah Engun says that she was detained for 9 days and was denied critical medical care. Well, now Gil Connell reports that she's speaking out on social media and millions of people are watching.
Hannah Engun enjoyed spending February in Hawaii, visiting family and playing beach volleyball at Queens in Waikiki. She flew home to San Diego, expecting life to continue as normal. Instead, her next stop was a green card interview that took a sharp turn.
We had no idea what was coming. We thought I would get my green card that day. We had no reason to believe otherwise.
Ngun says she acknowledged overstaying her visa. She was taken into custody and held at Otay Mesa Detention Center for 9 days. What she says happened next is why she's taken to social media. Ngun is a type 1 diabetic who relies on daily insulin.
And for the first 4 days, I couldn't eat and I didn't get my medication, even though I asked for it repeatedly every single day. I told them I couldn't eat without my medication. They didn't care.
Her body was struggling after not seeing a doctor until the 4th day.
Extremely bad. Blurry vision, shakiness, dizziness, headaches, dehydration, very typical signs of hyperglycemia. I lost 10 pounds in the 9 days that I was there, and I was very weak when I got out.
Ngun also claims her personal belongings were misused while she was detained.
So when I was arrested, I had my purse, and inside there was a credit card. And that credit card was being used while I was in detention. So that means that somebody at the facility stole my credit card and stole the information on it and started using it. And I have an affidavit of fraud right here, like specifying the dates. So if you see here, this November 24th, I was still in detention. I got out the 25th, and my card was being used. So it had to be somebody at the facility.
Now, she's turned to social media, posting videos on Instagram detailing her experience, getting almost 30 million views. Her deportation case was dismissed on January 26th. She currently has legal status to stay in the U.S. Gil Cano, Island News.
Jasmine Mooney is a Canadian citizen who had a work visa, no criminal record, and had been traveling back and forth between Canada and California without any complications until she says she was suddenly detained without explanation at the San Diego border when she tried to reapply for a new visa. Writing in The Guardian, quote, "I was taken to a tiny freezing cement cell with bright fluorescent lights and a toilet. There were 5 other women lying on their mats with aluminum sheets wrapped over them, looking like dead bodies. The guard locked the door behind me. For 2 days, we remained in that cell, only leaving briefly for food. The lights never turned off. We never knew what time it was, and no one answered our questions. No one in the cell spoke English, so I either tried to sleep or meditate to keep from having a mental breakdown, excuse me. I didn't trust the food, so I fasted, assuming I wouldn't be there long." She added, quote, "I was told to shower, given a jail uniform, fingerprinted, and interviewed. I begged for information. How long will I be here? I don't know your case," the man said. "Could be days, could be weeks. But I'm telling you right now, you need to mentally prepare yourself for months." Ultimately, Mooney says she spent 12 days in detention before she was finally allowed to book herself a flight back home to Canada. Joining us now, Jasmine Mooney. I was blown away by what you wrote in The Guardian. Explain what happened.
And I was in there for 12 days and not a single person talked to me the entire time that I was in there about my case.
Why do you think you were not given the opportunity? Do you feel like you were being used to send a message to others?
You know, I've been trying to come up with every explanation that I can, and I truly don't know. I was in there, I met around 200 other women who, none of us had a criminal record. Everyone's story was different, a lot of the same. A lot of women, I believe, should not be in there. And what I found is the issue wasn't about getting deported. A lot of women admitted that they overstayed their visas. It's just what the issue that they have is the process of getting out of there. It is next to impossible. There is no communication. You do not have an officer to talk to. You can't contact your lawyers or your friends or your family. I was transferred twice in 2 weeks, which is an awful experience. There were girls in there who had been transferred 8 times in a couple weeks. So the whole system just felt super rigged to keep us in there. That's what it felt like.
Well, because you write This is an interesting part of the article. You say companies like CoreCivic and GEO Group receive government funding based on the number of people they detain, which is why they lobby for stricter immigration policies. It's a lucrative business. CoreCivic made over $560 million from ICE contracts in a single year. In 2024, GEO Group made more than $763 million from ICE contracts. Do you believe that you were kept in there because you were a moneymaker?
Yes, I do. I believe that all the women in there are kept in there as long as possible, transferred around, because it's a business and they make money off of us. That's the only explanation that I could come up with, because I said from day one I would pay for my ticket to go home. The amount of wasted resources that I witnessed in there, the inhumane conditions, they did everything they can to cut costs. I was given one plastic spoon and one styrofoam cup to last the stay. It was when you start putting the pieces together, that is what I felt and came up with.
At first, at 11, it is a story you'll only see right here on NBC 10 Boston. A real estate attorney, an American citizen returning from Canada, says that he was detained without explanation. Thanks for staying up with us tonight. I'm Priscilla Casper.
And I'm Colton Bradford. Now, that New Hampshire man says he was traveling back from a quick family trip on Sunday when this happened. He spoke exclusively to our Jericho Tran about his experience. Jericho's joining us live right now with what he had to say. Jericho?
Yeah, well, Bashir Atala tells me that he has been a U.S. citizen for over 10 years. But on Sunday, he tells me he was not treated like a citizen at all when U.S. Customs and Border Patrol agents detained him and his wife for several hours with no explanation, all while Bashir was experiencing a medical emergency.
It started with the immigrants. It's coming to us Americans, and it's going to go after all of us.
Less than 14% of the nearly 400,000 immigrants arrested by ICE since President Trump returned to office a year ago have been charged with or convicted of violent criminal offenses. That is according to official statistics contained in a DHS document obtained by CBS News. Joining us, MS Now senior national and political reporter Jacob Soboroff. Also with us, NYU law professor and MS Now legal analyst Melissa Murray. Let's talk about the stats here. 14% had convictions, fewer than 14% had convictions for violent crime.
And on top of that, less than 2%, this is great reporting by CBS, less than 2% of those arrested by ICE over the past year had homicide or sexual assault charges or convictions. Less than 2% of 400,000. Another 2% of those taken into ICE custody were accused of being gang members. The larger picture is what we have seen anecdotally over and over and over again. They are not going after the worst of the worst, and you cannot institute the largest mass deportation program by going after only the worst of the worst.
There are not that many of the quote-unquote worst of the worst to go after, that if you want to do mass deportations, if you want to exceed the number of deportations that President Obama did, if you want 1 million people a year, that you're going to have to get people who are not violent criminals. It's just part of the issue.
Of course. And in fact, many of these states, Gavin Newsom, when I spent time with him, and Tim Walz also made it a specific point to let me know that they do cooperate from their state prison systems by handing the so-called worst of the worst over to ICE and to the federal government. And it's the county and the city jails that the federal government is trying to go into to get people maybe that don't even have convictions, might even be pre-trial for misdemeanor offenses.
It's confusing because on the one hand, you have deport them now, mass deportations now, which was at on the placards of the RNC. But you also have the president of the United States saying we need to go at this with heart. He's talking about people who have been here for 10 or 20 years, how they deserve to be here. He mentioned to the New York Times comprehensive immigration reform. So he seems to be saying one thing, signaling to certain people out there that it's only the bad people that we want to get out, not everybody else. But the actions of this administration are speaking to another hardline version of the MAGA base who wants to get every undocumented immigrant out of this country.
Bingo. And it reminds me of a moment that I will never forget, which is in my film with Errol Morris about family separation, when Donald Trump is sitting there signing an executive order to stop the family separation policy in late June of 2018, stopping a policy that he himself and the woman over his shoulder, Kirstjen Nielsen, put into place with her own signature just months before.
So we have an echo of that today, and this is reporting from ProPublica. Again, ProPublica, which released those haunting and horrifying audio of the children who had been separated from their parents crying during the first administration.
Ginger Thompson at the time really
So they have new reporting, and this is letters from kids who are being held in Dilley, Texas, the same detention center that Liam Conejo Ramos was held at. What do these letters say?
More extraordinary reporting by Michael Rosenberg here, and I want to just read some of the letters. Again, it gets to the point you can't have mass deportation without locking up not just nonviolent people, but children as well. Dilley has been a family detention center in this country in Democratic and Republican administrations. It was closed down during the last one. It's now reopened. Before, most of the kids that were there had been apprehended crossing the border. Now many kids are there being taken from the interior, out of their own day-to-day lives, going to school, speaking perfect English. Here's one letter. I miss my school and my friends. I feel bad since when I came here to this place because I have been here too long. This is a 9-year-old detained for over 50 days. Here's another letter. I have never been separated from my siblings, and it's honestly sad because they were little and they need their mom and their sister, and that's Ariana, whose U.S. citizen siblings are 2 and 5 years old. She's been detained for 45 days.
She's just 14 herself.
These stories they will rip your heart out of your chest when you read them, and it is impossible to think anything other than these aren't the worst of the worst. You don't have to think very hard. You don't have to read for very long. Go listen to the audio. It's some of the most extraordinary reporting I've seen in the second Trump term about who is actually being detained in all of this.
And you've seen no moves by the Trump administration toward comprehensive immigration reform, toward a pathway for citizenship if they would want it, nothing beyond just deport as many as we possibly can.
And not only that, they're looking at opening more detention centers that would house families.
Melissa, there's also the issue of trying to go through with all of these investigations, these prosecutions in Minnesota. What's happened in Minnesota and in Minneapolis has caused a wave of resignations in that state. The top ICE lawyer in Minnesota has departed as immigration lawsuits overwhelm the courts. We've also seen reporting, Melissa, that because there are so few prosecutors, the federal government has had to bring in JAGs.
With regard to what's happening at DOJ, we are seeing record numbers of career officials leaving the Department of Justice. And that's a real problem, not just in terms of immigration enforcement and the kind of backlog that we're seeing increasing. It was already backlogged. It's becoming even more backlogged. But it also has real consequences for DOJ's ability to address other kinds of crimes or other kinds of investigations in those areas. So, for example, in Minnesota, the U.S. Attorney's Office was not just handling ICE enforcement in those kinds of cases. They were also dealing with a massive fraud investigation. That's going to be very hard to continue to address if, in fact, the people leading that investigation have left, which is the case. So this is sort of a broader question of what's happening in the Department of Justice and losing people who are career prosecutors with real expertise.
Melissa, is it fixable? Can you get those people back?
It can be fixed. I don't know that a lot of people are going to be coming back in droves. And I think the real question isn't about fixing it, but what will replace it. So if you follow those who study the way democracies slide into autocracies, one of the things they know that is in administrative agencies like the DOJ, for example, when career people leave because they can no longer abide what is happening, that's a perfect opportunity for those who are loyal to the regime to burrow in and really become entrenched. So the question isn't whether there's a quick fix, but what will happen going forward to make sure that this isn't just an arm of a broader, more autocratic and oppressive regime.
The big, beautiful bill, that spending bill that passed last year, included $65 billion for ICE to build more detention facilities through 2029. Increased funding for ICE has also led to hiring of more ICE officers and expansion of operations to include more raids and more expedited removals. We know this. Typically, expedited removals are reserved for the worst of the worst, but because the Trump regime has deemed all immigrants the worst of the worst, that policy has expanded so now 5-year-olds can be sent for expedited removal, which provides for even fewer rights and less access access to due process than is offered under the regular removal process. There's a bottleneck problem in Trump and Stephen Miller's grand plan to arrest 3,000 immigrants a day. Even with the increase to 100,000 immigrant detention center beds that Trump has promised, with 3,000 arrests per day, which is also promised but not yet realized, those beds would fill up in a little over a month, further requiring an expedited removal process to keep those beds available. As it is, even without reaching the 3,000 per day promise, the existing facilities are incredibly overcrowded, with reports of horrific conditions inside. And so the Trump regime is attempting to solve that problem by buying up abandoned warehouses that they can turn into detention facilities. These are like Amazon-style giant e-commerce warehouses that DHS wants to throw some cages in and call it a day. Their other tactic is using military bases, some of which were the very sites of Japanese internment camps 80 years ago, and erecting soft-sided tents, often in the arid desert, to hold people in. According to reporting from Bloomberg, the Trump administration has attempted to buy up giant warehouses in at least 24 communities, many of which have seen huge backlash from community members, including in Republican districts. Here in Minnesota, a planned warehouse detention center was scrapped in Shakopee, a suburb south of the Twin Cities, after local residents protested the sale. But protesting the creation of these facilities is like playing whack-a-mole. The federal government is intent on finding the space, and there are a lot of giant warehouses that are owned by people who would probably love to cash in on a sweet, sweet government contract. And that's a common theme that you'll see throughout this discussion. There is a lot of money to be made on government contracts for these detention center facilities. According to Bloomberg, quote, on January 16th, the administration paid $102 million for a site near Hagerstown, Maryland, according to a local court filing. A week later, the government paid $70 million in cash for a warehouse in Surprise, Arizona. Surprise! The price tags, roughly in line with the industry average for the warehouse market, cover just the acquisition of the sites, which are currently empty shells. ICE still has to pay companies to outfit the buildings with toilets, showers, beds, dining and recreation areas, and then run them as detention centers. A third site in El Paso, Texas, meant to house up to 8,500 people, has also been secured, though the purchase price has not been disclosed. Another pattern you'll find here: lots and lots of obfuscation by the Trump regime. The more people they detain, the more opaque the entire immigrant detention apparatus becomes, whether you're trying to locate your loved one in the database or you're a Congress member attempting to exercise your legal right to tour the facilities in your jurisdiction. The Trump regime has made every attempt to keep these processes under wraps, which means the reports that have already come out of the abhorrent conditions in these facilities might only scratch the surface of the horrors happening behind closed doors. One facility with some of the worst offenses is called Camp East Montana, located at Fort Bliss near El Paso, Texas, and the U.S.-Mexico border. This is an example of the soft-sided tent facilities that it appears DHS is planning on expanding upon. A report from the Washington Post back in September cited 60 violations of DHS's own detention standards in the first 50 days of the center being open. Detainees were being shuttled into the detention center in the middle of the desert before construction had even completed. Violations included a lack of access to phones and lawyers, huge tents housing hundreds of migrants that were so loud and so bright at all hours of the day that no one could sleep, seeping sewage, spoiled food, denial of access to basic medical care, and more. And Camp East Montana is not an outlier. These complaints, overcrowding, no access to lawyers, unsanitary conditions, spoiled or insufficient food, and denial of medical care, are common and recurring across DHS facilities. Here in Minnesota, the surge in ICE activity has meant a surge in need for holding cells for immigrants and citizens alike. Numerous detainees report being held in horrific conditions at the Whipple Federal Building, where ICE has set up headquarters here, including being shoved with 50 others in rooms meant to hold half as many people. One woman reported being held in a locked bathroom with 3 men, and then when the men were removed, with another woman and her infant child who was sick with the flu and forced to sleep on a bathroom floor for the night. In 2025, at least 30 people died while in ICE custody, the deadliest year on record, even including during the COVID pandemic. Already this year, 6 more people have died in ICE custody. That number is guaranteed to rise and likely surpass last year's record. At least 3 of last year's deaths occurred at Camp East Montana, that soft-sided tent camp that was hastily erected in the desert outside El Paso. Most of the reported deaths occurred because of reported lack of access to medical care. And now, CNN and Immigrant Insider report that there will be a new infusion of cash into these soft-sided tent camps thanks to a backdoor contracting system set up between DHS and the Navy. According to reporting by Pablo Manriquez for Immigrant Insider, quote, a massive Navy contract vehicle, once valued at $10 billion, has ballooned to a staggering $55 billion ceiling to expedite President President Donald Trump's mass deportation agenda. The mechanism for this expansion is the Worldwide Expeditionary Multiple Award Contract, originally designed for military logistics abroad. In a move to bypass traditional competition delays, the Navy's Supply Systems Command has repurposed the vehicle for TITUS, territorial integrity of the United States. This $45 billion increase, published just weeks ago, converts the U.S. into a geographic region for expeditionary military-style detention. It signals a massive, long-term escalation in the government's capacity to pay for detention and deportation logistics. In the world of federal contracting, it's the difference between a temporary surge and a permanent infrastructure. What this means is that companies with existing Navy contracts can bypass the lengthy bidding process, and the public gets shut out of notice and comment periods, allowing for expedited federal contracts to pass on a moment's notice, meaning there can essentially be a ghost network of contractors at the ready to erect camp cities as quickly as possible. And these contractors are often experienced with military-style foreign missions and emergency situations. And the line items detailed by Manriquez indicate these would be permanent structures with medical facilities, mess halls, security apparatus, and chillingly, medical waste management with specific protocols for biohazard incinerators. With a bloated $55 billion budget for these facilities, the American Immigration Council estimates that in short order, the Trump administration could have upwards of 135,000 immigration detention center beds fully funded from now until 2029. Reminder that there were 40,000 total when he took office. And as I've said, reports coming out of these facilities are damning, from maggots in food to seeping sewage to children contracting measles. We have gone so far beyond family separation and children in cages at this point. And that's just what we know about. There's a reason Kristi Noem and the other goons are doing everything they can to keep the public out of these facilities. Will we have a similar situation where it'll come to light only later the extent of the horrors being committed by the U.S. government against detained immigrants? Never underestimate the power of racism. History doesn't repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme. Despite the horrific conditions in immigrant detention facilities today being documented across the United States, despite the deteriorating public opinion when it comes to the most egregious ICE hostilities, the ones that result in white people dying in the streets, there is still a shockingly large population in the United States, many of whom I'm sure you'll find right here in this very comment section, who are applauding this, who read the reports and say, good, serves them right for coming here illegally. Even as reports and images and videos of the emaciated prisoners in the concentration camps became public at the end of World War II, there were still many Nazis and Nazi sympathizers who thought Hitler was right, who looked that inhumane, barbaric treatment in the face and said that was right. Today, history is rhyming. We have children getting measles in a country that eradicated the disease a quarter century ago, while the regime sits by and says, well, at least they're not autistic. We have human beings being detained, beaten, held in overcrowded facilities, dying of medical emergencies, living in the seeping, oozing sewage of their fellow inmates, while the regime says, well, they're criminals, the worst of the worst. They're not humans. It's fine. Look away. But I encourage you to not look away. Bloomberg published a list of places where DHS is attempting to procure warehouses to store humans in. Some of these have been shut down, like the one attempted in Shakopee, Minnesota. Some are moving forward. I encourage you to do some Googling for your own area to see if there are reports of DHS attempting to find facilities near you. Putting up a stink has proven to work. Make it as hard as possible for DHS to find anywhere to put people. Encourage your Congress members to visit the ICE facilities in your area. Do you even know whether there are DHS detention centers in your area? Don't look away. It is easy to be distracted by the horrific manner by which DHS agents are capturing people, murdering people in the streets, but that's truly just the beginning. Protesters tend to be roughed up a bit, held for a while, and then released. Immigrants, however, are being wholly disappeared, kidnapped, and sent far away from home, no matter what their medical needs, no matter whether they have a lawyer, no matter whether they're here legally. We cannot be indifferent to that. They have to know that we are watching them. It won't stop the atrocities, but it's truly all we can do at this point.
Welcome back to the Dino Bidala Show. Right now, very happy to have Andrea Pitzer back on the show, a journalist, author of the book One Long Night, A Global History of Concentration Camps. She has a newsletter and her book you can find at andreapitzer.com. Andrea, thanks for being back on.
Thanks for having me back again, Dean, although unfortunate for the same reason that we have to speak here.
You know, you were on last year. We talked about an MSNBC op-ed you wrote about Don't Call Alligator Alcatraz, call it a concentration camp. So I wanted to start with that. Tell people again, what is a concentration camp?
So concentration camp is the mass detention of civilians. So not prisoners of war. We're talking everyday people, not at war. So mass detention of civilians without due process or real trial on the basis of identity. So something about who they are is what makes them a target. So that could be race, ethnicity, religion, political affiliation. And it is almost always done for for the expansion of political power and political entrenchment of authoritarian leadership.
And did you make, like, there's no due process in it? It's the idea, just round people up, put them in a camp, and it's open-ended detention?
Yeah, and so that's the thing, is that in every system I looked at, and I've looked at systems around the world, 6 continents, more than 130 years at this point, in every single system, these kinds of camps, this kind of detention was done as an end run around whatever was the existing legal system. Now, some of them were not legal systems you and I would have liked, but they're not always democracies where the camps rise, of course, many other places. But in each case, these kinds of camps and this kind of detention is an end run around whatever was in place, because the person who wants that leader or that party that wants the power doesn't have the patience or can't use the tools at hand. So they try to bring something bigger that won't have due process, that allows indefinite detention. And this is why we see people turn to it again and again, because systems have a way of slowing people down. And this is a way to expedite all that stuff and free up a lot of your agents, your law enforcement folks, because the whole idea of the concentration camp, a modern one, is it happened after the invention of and the patenting and the mass production of barbed wire and automatic weapons. So you don't need as many people to hold large numbers of people. And so that's part of the origins of the camps too.
And I'm not sure if you saw the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals on Friday had a really bad ruling. They cited for the Trump regime, and essentially it's open-ended. Anyone they grab who's even been here for 10, 15, 20 years, no criminal records, they can put in their camps, and there's no bail, and they can hold them there until a judge sees them. It could be 6 months, a year, or whatever. Are we at concentration camp status? Are we close to it? Does it depend on the facility and the circumstance of the person?
At this point, we are already in early concentration camp territory. For instance, Nazi Germany, 1933. Most people have heard of Dachau, and Dachau was pulled from an abandoned factory, and it was converted into one of the first Nazi camps. And so we have already seen facilities in towns. We have seen stuff commandeered in small ways, and subcontractors doing this extra detention. We have already seen judicial orders being ignored where they've been issued. We have already seen the deliberate refusal of things like medicine, inadequate food, and perhaps most importantly, I mean, we're seeing those results on the ground, but they are very deliberate results on the part of the administration. And I just want to underline, even almost a year before he was elected, Trump was already talking about 20 million people that they were going to go after, which is more than the actual number of undocumented people in the U.S. And just as an aside, I'll say historians debate it, but the Russian gulag that existed formally for a little over 2 decades, they argue over whether was it 18 million or whether it was 20 million that went through it as prisoners. So we are literally talking their ambition is something that size. And the early camps that we're seeing now, the early detention camps, particularly the show camps, like the one that people refer to as Alligator Alcatraz, we see these conditions of actually trying to create harm with the way that the camps are set up. We're already seeing that.
ICE is now acquiring these massive former warehouses like Dachau, and that's why you brought that up, and holding 8,000 detainees at one time. This would be massive. What more can you share about the administration's plan in terms of acquiring what are it's like airplane hangars and just jamming people into them?
So one of the things that I have said is that often when you see a massive, you can recognize a massive concentration camp expansion when everything becomes a question of logistics, right? And right now we are seeing this turn where they are running up against these logistics and they're trying to solve them in really dramatic ways. And when a country is talking about warehousing people and what are the logistics of how to do that, that country is in beyond camps or anything else, in a very bad place typically. And so I think our democracy is in a bad place, that it is created a fertile ground for this with the pre-existing immigration system before Trump even came in, with many other things in our history. But at this point, when it's a question of how you can accommodate the largest number of people with the least amount of care in the least expensive way, we already know what happens. And again, to underline the current facilities, pre-warehousing facilities, we are already hearing of people lying in feces who can't get their medical care. We are hearing of assaults. There have been 3 deaths already in Camp East, Montana, in Texas. One of them already ruled a homicide at the hands of guards. We have seen children who are losing weight, who are not eating. And there are some 1,000 children out of the 4,000 or so that are detained that we know of. Some 1,000 of them are already being held, have already been held in excess of the 20-day limit that is legally set forth to be able to keep kids in this kind of condition. And again, we're not at an end point, right? This is the starting point. And if this is where we're starting, this is where I would say we're already in concentration camp territory. And there's a term I use, like, we are walking toward Auschwitz. We are a long way from there. But why would you walk in that direction, right? Why would you approximate those conditions?
There's just a couple of cases I've seen recently. One was an Irish national who's been in the country, I think, for 2 decades, married to a U.S. citizen. He's been held since September, just being held. And one is a Palestinian American woman. She's not a U.S. citizen, but she's been living here. She went to Columbia, and she's been in detention for almost a year. Like,
she's lost 50 pounds. 50 pounds and has been hospitalized.
Yep.
I mean, that's the conditions of detention. And the Irish guy, I think his name is Seamus Culleton, if I'm right.
Yeah.
And he, there's, so not just that he's in this state, because I do think that there's a number of white Americans who would be concerned about an Irishman that this is happening to, but maybe not concerned about other populations, which I think is unfortunate if that's the case. But what he is describing happening to other people as well as to him, the things that he's witnessed in terms of beatings and the conditions in the facilities, it is terrible. And I think that this is another reason why how it exists now and what they're headed toward is horrific. The reason they do this end run around the systems is to be able to do more harm with less oversight. And we are already seeing way less oversight. Oversight in jails is already bad in America. Let me just be clear. We have real serious problems with our carceral system. The goal should not be have less accountability and have less oversight than that. And that's where we already are. And I think we're headed to even less accountability given what they want right now.
And your article gives us some potential coming attractions, which are alarming. We'll get to that in a second. When you heard about I believe it was 2 measles outbreak, there may have been more. I have to be honest on some level, and I know this might seem conspiratorial, but I'm like, you wonder if it's almost like the way the settlers gave Native Americans smallpox blankets. Like, I can't put it past. The reality is I can't put it past this regime. I think it's very unlikely. They release measles because of it's airborne. It can cause horrible damage to people if they don't have vaccinations. But I have to worry about germ warfare being used by this administration because they've dehumanized the migrants to the point where I don't think they're viewed as human beings by the guards.
See, I don't think there even has to be a conspiracy here. It certainly would fit the bill for that. But I think that it's almost worse than that. Because it's clear from the language of people at the top, particularly the Bovinos, particularly Stephen Miller, they don't care what happens to these people. They want this to be punishment. They want it as a deterrent. I would say that, even Democrats on Capitol Hill, a number of them have gone along for too long with using border detention, these facilities as a deterrent in punitive ways. That has afforded our current president a number of tools by which to do tremendous harm. And it's clear that people like Stephen Miller will be happy to see that disease and that harm spread. But I think the bigger thing of what's happening is that, and this goes to concentration camp history again, when you mix up the same ingredients and you put it in the oven, you get the same cake. And it doesn't even have to be somebody trying to bake a Nazi cake or a Soviet cake or a 1970s Pinochet and Chile cake, right? It's the same ingredients. And I think Americans as a whole should be super worried because part of the reason we're seeing this measles outbreak, and there's a TB outbreak at another camp as well, part of the reason we're seeing all that is because our own national public health system is being actively destroyed And I think that's less for conspiracy for some shadowy reason. And I think that is more for money, for people who are going to profit off of the ways that our public health system breaks down. And it's just that the canaries in the coal mine are these people, in fact, in detention. And for those people who don't know a lot about measles, I will tell you, if you are dealing with an undervaccinated or unvaccinated population, measles is a lethal disease. It is incredibly contagious. So we are at some point going to start seeing measles deaths in these detention facilities.
And again, it's all happening on U.S. soil. Now, in your article, you give us some warnings for the future based on the past, which are very instructive. I always look to the past and history. So you talk about the Trump administration is not just taking these actions for border enforcement. The mission has crossed over to explicit ethnic cleansing to entrench political power. Can you share a little bit more about that, please?
Sure. Again, all we have to do is to start with Stephen Miller's own words that America is for, quote, Americans, which apparently for him means white Americans. And this idea that this population should be removed is extremely explicit. We see social media accounts at DHS joking about deporting 100 million people. There is clearly a larger agenda of taking, quote unquote, our country back. And so this is the language that we see and the way that these people have been dehumanized for years by the first Trump administration, Trump throughout Biden's term, and then now again. This is the textbook language of ethnic cleansing. And the way that it is operating now, and I know people hear about it, but I want you to just take a step back. And we have secret police in masks on the street, crashing into people's cars, taking people who've been here 30 years, taking that poor gentleman who raised 3 sons who served in the Marines. And thank goodness that court order today barred his deportation, beating him up on the street. It is an active attempt to terrorize. And that's a lot of what concentration camps are about as well. But when you look and just at sheer numbers, for instance, we already have 3 times more people in immigrant detention in the U.S. than the Nazi concentration camp system had 5 years into the Third Reich. We have as many people in detention now as the Nazis had by the time World War II had started in their whole system. Now, Germany had a smaller population, of course, than we do now, but I don't think we should even be in that universe. I don't think that we should aspire to the 20 million of the Russian Gulag. I don't think we should be trying to meet or beat the Nazi numbers. But there's often this period of time in the first 3 to 5 year window when an aspiring authoritarian seizes power in which people can really make a big difference. And often there is a moment where there is sort of a struggle of whether the country will kind of turn more to just really vicious using the legal system or keeping this outside system, the camps, to expand those and then try to hold on to rule and have an ongoing terror that way. And we're on the back end of that now. And there's a number of ways that can end because countries that get to that point usually are pretty unstable. And so sometimes it's foreign interference. We're unlikely to be invaded. The U.S. is unlikely to have a foreign power come and take us over. But often there's some kind of power struggle that happens inside. I think what's most likely in the U.S. to actually have the potential still for the rest of this year, at least, to undo this is that we are absolutely the freest example of a society overall. Speaking of the population in general, we have more options than any of the countries I've studied in over 130 years, 6 continents. We have more ways to act and take action and actually stop this. So when I say how bad it is, I don't want people to feel paralyzed by that. I don't want people to feel hopeless.
And that's a great point. And we'll circle back to that before we end. I'm chatting with Andrea Pitzer, journalist and author of One Long Night, A Global History of Concentration Camps. You know, I'm concerned that there are many people not paying attention. I mean, Trump's approval ratings are falling through the floor right now. And I think there's a reason, even though unemployment on its paper is low, there's an unease around what's going on in this country. At least that's what I hope. But, you know, when you paint a picture right now, if you objectively looked at our country from the outside, armed, masked men walking in the streets who are just rounding people up, that they have immunity because we're told that and they're not charged with any crimes. They're building massive concentration camps. Journalists are being indicted. You have an effort to actually prosecute 6 members of Congress this week. Thankfully, the grand jury said no, but they're not going to give up on it. The Trump administration, this doesn't look like the United States of America. It's like something else, some other country that may be from history, but this is where we are.
Well, I think we have two heritages here politically, right? We have the heritage of Native American genocide. We have the heritage of slavery. We have the heritage of Operation Wetback, as it was called under Dwight Eisenhower, to be really violent and forcibly deporting a lot of migrants over the southern border. But we also have this other heritage that actually has helped end some concentration camp systems around the world and other places, which is this idea of liberty, of freedom, of democracy. And I think that that grim side of U.S. history, as it has been around the world, has really gotten a lot stronger in a lot of places. And I think it makes some of the stakes clear. But I adamantly say that we also have this other heritage, right? And that's the country that we need to aim to. But we can't get there without acknowledging the weaknesses that brought us where we are, because concentration camps don't come out of nowhere. They rise in a country because of things like income inequality, because of prejudice and racism. It takes a long time to make this possible. And so I think that we have to actively share and embrace that vision of a country that is our better side. The moments we have triumphed, the civil rights movement, women voting. I mean, we have to hold on to the liberties that so many people have fought hard for.
Yeah. And you mentioned other countries, obviously the Nazis, we know what happened there. Are there any other examples in more democratic nations that you've seen of concentration camps and how they were able to end? Because obviously the Nazis, it took the downfall of the Third Reich. And with, Russia, I mean, I guess it continued through Stalin, or did it continue even after
With
Stalin?
the death of Stalin, a lot changed, but obviously still a lot of issues with Russia ever since and today. But the Gulag, the formal Gulag, ended at that point. Yes, it started to taper down.
So are there any lessons that from other countries? And because obviously getting involved in politics here, and what I'm getting at is that enough? Will they do it? Can that do it? Our domestic policy and the way we come out in elections?
Elections alone, I think a lot of people are sitting around kind of waiting they realize people are mad at Trump and unhappy, and they're like, well, the elections will take care of this. But I really want to encourage people that the elections are going to have to be just one tool to undo this. Please do go out and vote. That will be a way to make a huge shift in what's happening. And at the same time, we have to be at work in our communities in other ways, stopping ICE facilities from coming to where we are, paying attention to detention, not letting these toeholds, be made and inroads into this kind of detention, so that your town locally, like Dachau was just the name of the town, right? You don't want your town to be memorialized as a camp in history. And so I encourage people to take action. And later, if you want, I can tell you specific things for that. But in terms of how people have ended it on a bigger scale, if we go back to Pinochet's Chile, right? The mass detention actually was partly stopped by U.S. pressure after there was a killing, an assassination of Orlando Letelier in D.C. The U.S. started pressuring Chile to break up the secret police that they had. But of course, it did continue for a long time. And then it really relied on the people to take up action. And they did not stop demonstrating. They did not, at great risk to themselves, they did not stop secret communications. They began to press back. And eventually they were able to press for a public referendum, which Pinochet mistakenly thought he was going to win. And so, but that took them more than a decade. And it was partly because the power was so completely seized in the beginning. I don't want to be back here every year for a decade with you in the hopes that we might be able to end it. And so that's part of why I'm saying I think this year is the action year by which we still have all this means to talk to each other. Journalists can still speak out even as they're being attacked. We still have a partially functioning court system. And even though sometimes those court orders are ignored in detention, we also see forced accountability from some judges. Liam Conejo Ramos was released. Whatever happens going forward, Kilmar Abrego Garcia was brought home. It is possible to chip away at all this. And I think that we need to be doing it in our communities. Just posting stuff online is not sufficient. You have to go out and actually network. And that might be literally just helping like people who are in detention, helping their families out. Right. That might be something through your church. That might be that you find out there's a great project called the Salt Box Project that is identifying all these warehouses around the country, figure out if one is coming to your area, talk to your city council, talk to your elected reps, right? There's all these things you can do to start setting up barriers. And there's literally a million things. And if people want to, they can look at my newsletter for my very long lists of things to do. But
that's very helpful. When you look at ICE, does history tell us, and I'm not sure if it does or not, but I'd love to get your opinion on this. Does history tell us, can it be reformed, or does it have to be abolished and a new agency take its place?
I think ICE as exists now and Border Patrol as it exists now, I think both of them have become the sort of Praetorian Guard symbolically of the president. They're too allied with the president. They have to be abolished in their current form. One of the things that I tend to say is the answer to correct response to Dachau was not better training for the guards. ICE as it exists and DHS, Department of Homeland Security, have only existed for a brief period of time in the nation's history. And I think we have to, if people are uncomfortable with the word abolish, then think of it as dismantle. Think of it as diminish. How do you deconstruct that down to something that is not about punishing and targeting a population that can then be used to damage the entire country itself, that same tactic, that same approach, because it's clear that this model that we have used to get here is incredibly dangerous. And it has happened in other places. Accountability sometimes takes a long time. I think of a woman I talked to in Argentina who was kidnapped, tortured, held indefinitely. I mean, horrific things happened to her under dictatorship there. They kept her blindfolded all the time for the very reason that ICE is masked, right? So that there can be no accountability. There will be accountability. The question is, how long will it take before we have it? And I would much rather us do it on the shorter time frame because it is more likely to keep our country stable and give me hope for our country, more likely to have less harm come to people who deserve none of it. I think that we have to really put a stop to what Trump is doing if we don't want it to keep cyclically returning as he did himself.
I mean, we're on the path to the same things that you've studied through history. I mean, if something doesn't change its trajectory, what's next? What will be the next thing that we should really be alarmed about if it happens?
I mean, the warehousification of this, if they get like we are on the verge of it, but we can still stop a lot of that. But once there's two things that have to happen. They have to have more detention beds to be able to lock up more people, and conditions in them will get worse. In addition, they need more agents. They need more secret police. Right now, they can do what they're doing in Minneapolis and in LA and in Chicago. They can do it in a few places at the same time, but they can't do it everywhere, right? And so they are really pushing those numbers. And the shaming of ICE is wonderful that people are doing. The mocking, I mean, some people say, oh, but like, what if they get mad? Well, it's like, they're already mad. They're already doing really bad things. And to make it a shameful thing to be part of that. And I would even go further, like California, I think, is the state that's looking at, if you participate in this, that you cannot hold municipal jobs. You cannot be a teacher. You cannot be a firefighter. I would love to see a bunch of states do that and also cross-index so that they make a compact together that you will lose your future if you participate in this. So there's all kinds of ways we can make it harder and harder, because if they don't get a lot more agents, they also won't be able to do it. So the things to watch for are these warehousing drives successful, and are they able to massively increase the numbers of ICE agents? They've already doubled in the last year. So we need to stop it sooner than later.
Well, so if we win the election this year, say Democrats win the House and even the Senate, then what would be the next goal? I mean, obviously the presidency, but anything else we could do as the people to stop this?
So there's a couple things. Yes. First of all, be aware that even if we get the Senate, we can gum up the works. But in terms of passing legislation, there'll still be a veto, which will still hem in how much can actually be accomplished, right? But it will be a huge thing in stopping many things of what's going on. And you have budget things that can happen. You can have clawbacks that might be able to be done depending on the circumstances. And I would say also, but just throwing a wrench in the works would be a huge gain from where we are now. So I think that's really critical and important. I would like to see blue states and Democratic leadership not just figure out how to kind of get by, but to actually propose a vision of a truly democratic America, because people seem extraordinarily hungry for that. 46 people, even before I think it was Liham Conejo Ramos, 46% of Americans, all Americans, were already saying abolish ICE in surveys. There is a hunger for a leadership that imagines something better for the country. And a lot of that can be done even before you can stop a presidential veto. But in addition, I would say do not give up on red states and red state voters in this moment. The economy is getting worse. They are already angry. People disapprove of ICE. More and more Republicans are disapproving of ICE. But more importantly, you have these legislators like Wicker in Mississippi, who just made a call to Kristi Noem to do a NIMBY, like not in my backyard, with one of the warehouses because people were angry about it. They don't want to be associated with it. I think you will find a lot of Republicans are there. So here's a place where, for once, bipartisanship might actually be a practical good goal for the country and for our democratic values. But there's a million ways that we can work on this. And I think that actively people in those blue states who have not been able to elect the people they want, this is your moment to gather local opposition to this stuff and get those guys to make calls to their friends in the agencies. And if that goes to blue states, then blue states can be working to shut it down too. There's all kinds of ways we can work together.
Well, I really appreciate you laying it out. And what's the website? Where can people go to check out your newsletter, which has a big list of things, and it's really a great reference guide. Very helpful.
So if you go to AndreaPitzer.com, so in the first page there, it will tell you how to subscribe to the newsletter. If you want to read the book about the camps, and there's a lot of other stuff, it's everything you could be looking for if you want more info about this.